Okay, welcome everybody to the 6th Kazzie Connect. My name is Maria Georgioulis Mangos and I am on the current KAV committee. Also, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker this evening, Dr Nicholas Lolatgis, who we'll be hearing from very shortly. Thank you everybody for joining and supporting this event. And if there's anybody out there who has guest speaker who would like a guest speaker, please contact Lena Coates, who will be very happy to hear from you regarding any further Zoom meetings. Now, I'd like everybody to please press to unmute themselves and or to mute themselves, sorry. And if there's this is a recorded event, so if you do not want to be seen, please block yourselves from this recording. I'll hand you over now to Kathleen Grosso, who will introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. As you just heard, my name is Kathleen Mangos Grosso, and I'm serving on the committee at the moment as well. And I'd like to introduce Dr Nicholas Lolatgis for doing this presentation tonight. So since 1981, Nick has been at the absolute forefront of the reproductive medicine. As a director of the Centre of Infertility Solutions since 2015, his holistic approach and his knowledge has helped many women achieve their dream of having a family. Nick, a proud Kastellorizian and recipient of the Kastellorizian of the Year Award in 2004, will look back at his Kazzie heritage and his professional career path, achieving recognition as a leading IVF specialist. He will take us through the IVF journey and talk about why so many couples are reproductively challenged and the various IVF options open to them, and the current IVF advances. It's promised to be a frank, informative and engaging session, so we'll all have the opportunity to ask questions at the end, and anyone else who wants to connect with others at the end in an informal manner. That's what Kazzie Connect is all about. So we're very proud to have Dr Nick Lolatgis company. So take the opportunity to connect with us and invite other friends and family are all welcome. So Nick, we'd like to hear from you and do a presentation.
All right, well, look, let me start off by saying in this pandemic, it is a problem, and my advice to all women who are attempting a pregnancy or who are pregnant, they should be vaccinated. There's no doubt that that's the way things should happen, and that's the recommendation from the colleges both here and overseas for pregnant women and for women who are trying to get pregnant. Suffice to say that because of the pandemic, not much travel has occurred, and the business, the IVF business, has increased by about 30%. So couples have nothing to spend their money on, so they're spending it on infertility treatments. Some basic facts. Women are born with 2 million eggs. At puberty, they have 400,000 left, and they release in their lifetime a maximum of about 480 eggs. All the other eggs die. So every month, about 800 eggs die. So depending on how many eggs you're born with, some women have got a bit more and they go on having periods until their late 40s, early 50s. And other women can stop having periods quite early if they're born with fewer eggs. Your best eggs are when you're 24. Your egg quality starts to decline from 24 to 34 and drops off rapidly when you get to 40. Men's sperm, on the other hand, starts to deteriorate after the age of 41. So what is the problem? 1 in 6 couples will have infertility. 85% of couples conceive within 12 months, 15% don't. And when they come along to be investigated, we find the following. Either there's nothing to find, the tubes are blocked, the semen is poor, the patient may have other conditions that stop her from conceiving, such as maybe endometriosis, ovarian cysts, polycystic ovaries. Sometimes we don't find anything, but the investigation has to be, is the semen okay? Are the tubes open? are there any other conditions preventing this couple from achieving a pregnancy? And in the old days, before IVF, we had very little ammunition. There was nothing we could do other than pat them on the head, tell them to keep trying, give them fertility tablets to take, and that was it. But everything changed in the late 70s when we managed to achieve in vitro fertilization. And now we can help anybody. And my motto is there's always a solution to the problem. So when we developed the art of micro-injecting eggs with a single sperm, that changed it for male infertility. So after you've done all those investigations and you find nothing or you find a problem, usually, and this depends on the age of the couple, you advise to go through an IVF program. Now, with IVF, we have to stimulate the ovaries to produce more than one egg, and we do that by giving injections. And we save some of those eggs that would have died that month. Those eggs are harvested. We used to do this by an operation where we put a telescope through the belly button and a needle and then suck the eggs out under vision. But now we do it through the vagina using a needle under ultrasound control. And we are very close to the ovary and we just jab the ovary and suck the fluid that's in the ovary that contains the eggs. Those eggs go into the laboratory where we either put sperm around the egg, that's called standard insemination, or we micro-inject the eggs with a single sperm. That's called ICSI. The overall success rate depends on your age. So if you're early 30s or late 20s, you have about a 40% to 50% chance of a pregnancy on your first go. If you're 40, it's 20%. So there's a dramatic drop in chances. So for most women, my advice is start to think about having your family first. Once the egg is fertilized, we grow the embryo for 5 days, and then you have a couple of options depending on your age. In those women who are 35 to 40, I often recommend that we test the embryo, and we do this by direct biopsy. When the embryo gets to 5 days, we take cells out of the embryo and we examine them for any genetic mishap. If you have a tested embryo going into the uterus, your chances of a pregnancy goes to 60%. So it's worthwhile doing the testing. In young women under 32, there's probably no need to do the testing. And in women over 40, sometimes it's hard to grow the eggs or the embryos out to day 5. So the overall pregnancy rate is quite good for women between 30 and 40. And my advice is don't dilly-dally. If you have infertility and they can find nothing, move to IVF. If a man has a very low sperm count, it's unlikely that he will produce a pregnancy. And if you have no tubes, or if the tubes are blocked, or if they've been removed, it's very difficult, well, it's almost impossible to achieve a spontaneous pregnancy. And sometimes we just don't find anything. And in those situations, it is best to move on to IVF. Now, not everybody wants to do IVF. And so some patients who have open tubes and who have normal sperm can do IUI. But if the success rate, that's where we put the husband's sperm into the uterus at the appropriate time when the egg has been released. Unfortunately, the pregnancy rates from IUI are a third that of IVF. So if IVF gives you a 30% chance, IUI will give you a 10% chance. In the early days of IVF, we always thought that it was important to do laparoscopies and excise endometriosis and make sure everything was normal in the pelvis. But recent studies have shown that that's unnecessary. And you can have endometriosis and still have the same sort of success, whether you have surgery or not. So I only operate now if the patient has symptoms from her condition. So 1 in 5 patients, 1 in 6 have infertility. And unfortunately, because of education, travel, careers, and so many other options, women are delaying their childbearing until their 30s. And it's harder. It's much harder. I think back to the early days when, I mean, I'm now in my 70s, but back then there weren't all these activities that you could do. And so you got married and you had kids. That was it. But now there's lots of things to do that take up your time, travel and education and those things. So my practice is full of lots of women who are 30 plus trying for a baby, and it can be difficult. The testing of embryos is very, very unique. We actually take cells. It doesn't harm the embryo, and we can certainly increase the pregnancy rates. Not every embryo can be tested, however, and some embryos we get no result from. So we just have to take a plunge and transfer those embryos. But if you can have a quality embryo put back into your uterus, you have a very good chance. There's not much we can do for men's semen other than use donor semen if it's very, very poor. Sometimes we can put needles into the testicle and extract sperm directly from the testicle, which is often of better quality than the ejaculated specimen, but that is a bit painful and may need an anaesthetic. So the message I give to my patients is that infertility is about two things. One, the produce, the quality of the eggs, the quality of the semen, how good is the embryo, and then the oven. How good is the oven? Because there are problems with the oven in some women where the uterus, the oven is hostile to the embryo, and there are protocols and strategies to control that in some of my infertile patients. So it is a long journey for some, and it can go on for a long time. And that's why one has to try and maximize the chances of a pregnancy with their very first cycle. Now, some women have got such poor quality eggs, they need to think about moving on to donor eggs or to donor sperm if the husband's sperm is of poor quality. This is a big ask for most couples. They find it very difficult to even think about using somebody else's eggs or sperm. But sometimes it is the only answer to their problem. And usually if you have a young egg donor, the pregnancy rates are high. So I have a clinic in Greece that I used to send all my patients to before the pandemic. Quite young, the pregnancy rate is about 60%, which is fantastic. Now, in this pandemic, we're importing eggs from America, but they're pricey, $28,000 for 7 eggs with a 48% chance of a baby with those frozen eggs that are brought in from the States. But over the 40 years, I've seen so many changes. In the old days, we never used to test the embryos. We just put them back. We didn't have the ability to inseminate directly the eggs. Freezing, well, that's another ball game completely. The oldest embryo to survive freezing and thawing and produce a baby was 24 years. So if the freezing process is right, you can keep those embryos frozen for as long as you want. Except in Victoria, the government wants you to make a decision every 5 years why you haven't used the embryos. And I haven't even begun to talk about the need for some couples to move on to surrogacy, where their embryos are implanted into a surrogate who then has the baby and hands it back to the patient. There's a clinic in Crete that I use quite a lot for surrogacy. It's a lot cheaper than America, but still costs you about 80 grand. And we ship the embryos over there and they provide a surrogate. So there's always a solution to your infertility problems if you're prepared to think out of the box and go down lengthy pathways. The procedure for the female is very safe. Very few women have complications from the egg collections. The risks are the needle could hit the bowel, bladder, blood vessel, or introduce infection, but they're very rare. And for the male partner, there are virtually no complications unless you're having sperm extracted directly from the testicle. Now, I've given you a pretty general overview, but most of the couples that come to see me generally want to have that little baby in their arms. And that's a great gift, especially if they are receiving eggs from a friend or a relative or if somebody is offered to be a surrogate for them. And it's a wonderful result when they do conceive. But then they have the same risks that all couples have of miscarrying or genetic abnormalities if the embryos aren't tested. And it's expensive. So a cycle of IVF at Monash will cost you out of pocket about $6,000 for the first cycle. And if you have frozen embryos from that cycle, it's about $3,000 to transfer subsequent embryos. So I'm not too certain how much more you want me to go on about that process, but there are all these little subgroups of patients that require different sorts of strategies. And I put patients on lots of vitamins to try and improve egg quality. The Mediterranean diet is the best diet for that, believe it or not. And there are some revolutionary experimental treatments to try and improve egg quality. So I have a lot of women who have passed the age where they can have IVF, where I try and rejuvenate their ovaries by injecting them with platelet-rich plasma. I have stem cell therapies for women as well, just to try and improve their egg qualities because they can't make that decision to move on to donor eggs. And it's much harder for the men to accept using donor semen, but some do.
Thank you, Nick. Did you want to add any more to that?
I think I'll leave it there. I think I've generated enough questions from that to continue.
Very interesting information. Thank you, Nick. Can we open up everyone, and if anyone has any questions, please ask Nick.
So feel free to ask.
Nick Spartel's here. Thank you very much for that informative information. I just want to know, how did you get into medicine? What was, when did you know you wanted to get into it, and how did you get into the IVF? What made you get into that direction?
Well, there's a book called by Malcolm Gladwell called The Outliers, and it's a book that everybody should read, and it's all about opportunity and being in the right place at the right time. So how did I do medicine? I finished my VCE, I was 17 and a half, and I was sitting in a room with a Jewish mate of mine, and I said, what are you going to do? And he goes, my mother wanted me to be a doctor. And I said to him, can I come? And he goes, tick that box. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I got into medicine. And then I did my 6 years and went to England for about 18 months. And when I came back, I was the senior registrar at Monash, at the Queen Victoria Hospital in 79, and went into practice in 81. And I was there collecting eggs with Carl Wood at the very beginning. And Carl and I got on very well. And he said, do you want to join our group? And I said, why not? And so that's how I entered. I was at the right place at the right time and showed enthusiasm and interest in that area. And so I slowly built up my practice in infertility and gave away obstetrics. And now I'm just devoted to helping women conceive, or couples conceive.
Well, it's a wonderful, Nick, wonderful role for any medical student that is thinking of going into gynecology or obstetrics. Tell me, Nick, how on earth did you study all those years in that wonderful Katsukas household?
Okay, so that's a very good question. It was called Edry. It was called Edry in Brighton Road, and there were 23 of us living under the same roof.
So where, did you hibernate and study? How did that happen?
I would study from 10 o'clock till 2 o'clock in the morning when everybody had gone to bed and there was no noise. And then that's when I would study and get up at 6 and go to university.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
It wasn't easy.
Nick, it's Ross Goliath. How are you?
Yes, Ross.
Tell me, mate, is it possible in the future that women can become pregnant without a man's sperm?
You would need, probably no, because you would have to somehow engineer stem cells to be sperm. Now, that's not an impossibility because we're working on creating eggs out of the women's stem cells. It's early days at the moment, but we have come, the group of doctors that I work with at PASPA Pharmaceuticals are trying to see if we can create eggs from stem cells. So the same could apply to creating sperm from stem cells. So it might be that that may happen.
If it ever did, how do you believe it would manifest in society? How would it affect society? How would it affect relationships between man and woman?
Well, there may not be any. I mean, if you have a woman who wants a baby, she can make eggs and sperm from her own stem cells. Forget the bloke.
Yeah.
We'll be redundant.
We will. We'll be sacked.
and not only that, Ross, one of the alarming features in the world is that men's sperm counts are dropping around the world. And it's thought to be due to the estrogen in the water that is doing it. So, you know, I think get in there and have your families sooner rather than later would be my advice.
Thanks, Nick.
Yep. Nick, it's Mike Zervos, and seeing you just talked about making men redundant, I might shift the conversation a bit.
Okay.
I'll start by saying I'm in awe of what you do and how you do it, and with it's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Referencing that house in Brighton Road, I managed to get to a few parties there, and I'm not sure whether I was envious or scared of that environment. It just seemed so alluring and hypnotic and scary all at the same time. But my question is, just linking to your Greekness, how do you think your Greekness has sort of permeated you as a person and in your career, and particularly your sort of Kazzie-ness?
Well, most of us know that if you're Greek and you're 17, you're called a wog. And that was, nobody made a big fuss about it. You were just a wog, you know, and you got on with life and you played your footy and you did your work and you passed your examinations and it sort of made you tougher. I was very proud of my Greek heritage. I always regretted the fact that I didn't continue speaking Greek when I went to university. And you've all probably experienced it. All my kids spoke great Greek until they went to English school or to school, and then they sort of lost it because they didn't go to a Greek school. So, but there's a certain amount of pride being Greek, and I tell people my heritage when they ask me, and they go, "Oh, you're one of those from Kastellorizian," or you know, because there's a lot of us out here, so they know about the island. Does it make me a better doctor? I don't know. Maybe we're a little bit more compassionate. Maybe we're more worldly in terms of what goes on. But you have to have a lot of empathy for patients, and you can't get cross, and you've got to give them time, and you have to let them speak. And I think that that's what they need. They need a little bit of TLC. It's a horrific journey, especially for, I had to do a curette on a woman this morning because she has recurrent pregnancy loss. And I know the solution to her problem, but her religion won't let her do that. And so it is a very sad tale. You have this conflicts of the good treatment, which is banned by the church or by whatever faith it is. So you just keep on trying. Never give up.
Nick, it's Nick again. One question I'd like to ask you, I know at the start of your presentation, you said to get vaccinated. Now, we're having a debate today with some of my guys on one of my job sites about their teenage daughters. Now, if they got vaccinated, would it affect their reproductive system? What are your thoughts on?
It won't affect their reproduction or their reproductive systems or the pregnancy, should they be pregnant.
Okay.
Strong message in the college.
Good evening, Dr. Nick. My name is Nick Kirk. I'm from Brisbane.
Yes, Nick.
This is the first time that I'm attending the Kazzie Connect event, so thank you very much for the invitation. You mentioned previously about sperm numbers being, you've noticed that they are reducing for whatever reason. You didn't talk about the quality of sperm and sperm motility. Is that the issue, or is it what specific? What specific?
You look at sperm. You look at four parameters. One of the most important parameters is the quantity of sperm. So the normal range is anywhere above 15 million sperm per mil, and a man normally ejaculates 1.5 to 3.54 mils. That's all he ejaculates. The second thing that you look at is the motility. How good a swimmer is it in a forward way?
Mm.
And then you look at the sperm head to see, is it a normal shaped head? Is it crinkled? Is it short? Is it long? Are there two bodies? Are there two tails? Has the sperm got a wrinkled body? So most men don't know this, but out of 100 sperm, 4 will be normal only. And lately, there's a new test that looks at the DNA fragmentation rate of the sperm, and that gives a good indicator as to how good the sperm really is. So if the sperm is of poor quality, the things that I look at in men, are they overweight? Do they exercise? Are they smoking? Are they around toxic chemicals? They're the sorts of things that you can correct or try to correct. And I work hand in hand with Chinese medical practitioners and physios and naturopaths to try and get the best environment for men to improve their semen.
So quality's going down or quantity's going down?
Both.
Both.
Both. The most important is the number of actual normal sperm you have. So there are some men that've got 1 out of 100 sperm that are normal. They would find it difficult to achieve a spontaneous pregnancy.
Hi, it's Maxim here. I was just wondering, did you say that you team up with Chinese doctors to?
Yep.
Oh, what is that kind of relationship like?
Well, I encourage my patients to do things that give positive mindfulness. And some women find acupuncture and all those classes that they go to and have with acupuncture with Chinese medical practitioners very calming. So studies in the States show that if you're anxious and depressed, when you're having IVF, you have half a chance of a pregnancy compared to happy women. So it's all about getting your mind right, being positive about something. And a lot of patients come to see me with infertility, and I give them a plan, I give them positive feedback, and I encourage them. And they often achieve a spontaneous pregnancy without me having to do IVF because they're in the right frame of mind. So I'm a great believer in that.
Nick, can we ask about the vitamins?
Yep.
Which vitamins would you give to the women?
Well, mainly antioxidants. So that's coenzyme Q10, melatonin, omega-3 fish oil, vitamin E, vitamin D, lipoic acid, L-arginine, inositol. I'll stop there. You'll hear a Kazzie coming, they'll be making a lot of sound from all the tablets dangling around in their stomach. But they work. And then during the cycle itself, you can give extra hormones like growth hormone to improve the egg quality. But it's hard if you're getting older. The oldest woman I've helped was 53.
Wow.
But she didn't do it with her own eggs. She did it with donor eggs. The oldest woman with her own eggs about 44 and a half. And that's about a 5% chance. So even though you feel fantastic and you're having regular periods and you eat a good diet and all those things, unfortunately, the chromosomes within the eggs they get old. They don't work properly. So in overseas, there are some centres where they take your nucleus, your genetic material, and they put it into the white of a young egg. But that's outlawed in Victoria. You can't do that. You can only use donor eggs, and then you can't pay them. It's a fascinating area of
ask a question.
Change and development, and new things are happening all the time.
Nick?
Yeah.
Olivia wants to ask a question.
Yep.
Hi, Nick. I found that I caught the last half of that and it was really, really interesting. I just wanted to ask a question about the process of egg retrieval. So, for example, for young people, what would you suggest? Particularly myself, I have friends who have already been diagnosed with things like endometriosis and these type of kind of reproductive, problems. What would you suggest in terms of, are there programs or like government help in terms of if I needed to go and do egg retrieval young and like freeze my eggs in
so for all my patients who have endometriosis, I tell them at the very beginning, if they're young, that they should try and freeze their eggs around 24, 25.
Yeah.
So the process for that, if you have a medical condition, it's not as expensive than social egg freezing.
Mm-hmm.
Most doctors can find a medical reason for doing the freezing, so it costs you about half the amount. You need at least 20 eggs for you to be on the safe side. And I've just done a pickup on a patient and she got 31 eggs from her first cycle. So that's a fantastic result. And so you'll have those as a insurance policy going forward. And then you can thaw them out in what we call a VOT procedure, vitrified oocyte thawing. And if you've got a partner, you use his sperm or donor sperm to create the embryos when you're ready.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Nick.
And you can have those frozen for as long as you want. It's like taking out an insurance policy. But, you know, women should think about freezing their eggs. It's no good coming to me when you're 42, so I want to freeze my eggs. Forget it. You know, you pass the post. You've got to do it when you're younger. And I don't think there's any plan by any government to provide that. My idea was, why don't you offer young girls, all young girls, free egg freezing at 24, one go, 24, one go. Don't charge them. And then if they want to use those eggs later in life, then you can charge them for the egg.
Good.
If they don't use them, they don't get charged.
Yeah, very good.
But, you know, and then they could offer them to other women if they wanted to.
Mm.
Nick, it's Mike Zervos again. Can you influence gender?
Can we influence gender? We can by testing the embryos and then deciding what embryo to transfer if the couple wanted a boy or a girl. Now, about 3 or 4 years ago, we would tell the couple the gender of the embryo tested. They couldn't select, but we would tell them the sex. So they couldn't say, I want a boy or I want a girl. That was illegal. But we were telling them the sex of the embryo we were transferring. And 2 of our patients then terminated the pregnancy when they were successful because they didn't think it was the right sex. So we put a ban on that. So now you don't find out until you do your 10-week scan, when you can find out by other ways, other means. So you can't do sex selection. Only if there is a sex-linked condition. For example, I've had permission from the ruling body, VARTA, to transfer female embryos in families that have had a number of autistic children. So they will give you permission if you can highlight conditions that are sex-linked. It's a very complicated area, and I'm trying to keep it reasonably simple so that we don't get caught in too many technical details. But it's all about getting an egg, getting the sperm, making the cake, putting it in the oven, and hoping the oven works. All right? Like baking a cake.
Greeks have always been good cooks, Nick.
Always been good cooks, correct. And, you know, lots of women. If you go to my YouTube station, there's a woman there called Madeline who kindly did a video for me. And I told her she needed donor eggs and donor sperm. So she finally did that. And she makes a comment. When you have that baby in your arms, you don't care where the gametes or the sperm or eggs came from, because they use donor egg and donor sperm. And then I have other patients who present to me very late in life, and I tell them I need to go down the donor egg, donor sperm pathway, and they do that, and they have their family. Have I bored you all?
No, it's very, very interesting. Do we have any more questions?
It's been extremely interesting, I feel. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think that so I don't think women know enough about their body and the fact that they're born with a finite number of eggs, and it would be best to store some of these young eggs if they could, and not leave it till their mid-30s or 40s. And I think that the other issue is that donor sperm is very scarce at the moment. So it's hard to get good donor sperm. And so some couples are looking amongst family, friends, and relatives for that.
Is that a last resort or a first preference to go to family?
For some couples, it's a first preference. It must have been the Greek in me, because when I was a medical student, you could donate sperm to an infertility clinic and you'd get $40 a throw, and you were limited to 2 a week. And I thought to myself, I wasn't comfortable with the idea of having little Lolatgists running around without my knowing who they were. So I never did it. But a lot of my my Aussie colleagues did it.
Nick, it's Ross Goliath, mate.
Yeah.
Tell me, would there be any other underlying reasons why, apart from women wanting a family later in life, why they're struggling with fertility reasons? Could it be lifestyle? Could it be anything else?
Well, the major reasons, 30% of couples who struggle have husbands with poor semen. And then there's about 20% there where we don't find anything. And the balance are made with problems with the female, not ovulating, the timing's out, poor quality eggs, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
We're not great reproductive animals. You see, the chance of a pregnancy every month is 20%. The cumulative pregnancy rate after 6 months is 65%. And after a year, it's 85%. But 15%, or 1 in 6 couples, just don't get pregnant after trying for 12 months. And these are the ones that come to see the infertility specialist. And some of those, it's an easy fix. Give them tablets to make sure they're ovulating. Educate them on when to have intercourse in the cycle. But some of them need to move on to IVF, especially if they're getting older, because there's no joy. I mean, to give you an example, I said 20% at 40, it's 4% at 45. So there's a huge drop in that older age group. And, some women are getting married later in life,
Well, it pleases me to hear, Nick, you don't think it's, climate change that's doing it.
No, no, I don't think. Although, should the man have increased heat around his genitalia, he will drop his sperm. He'll drop his sperm count.
Yeah.
So keep those testicles flopping and not tight in those tight boxes, boys. Get loose fitting underwear.
What about stress, Nick, with females? What about stress? You find that once they think they can't have a baby or a child, does it play on their mind?
Yeah, Nick, that's a very good question. They've done studies in the States, and if you're stressed and you're doing IVF, you have half the pregnancy rates of happy women. So I often tell them to go and have a holiday and come back when they're happy.
Calm down, yeah.
Calm down, yeah. You know, but you know, most of the patients that I see, they want it done yesterday. They haven't got the patience to wait and be fully investigated and then proceed.
Is it happening more now in the modern era? Like in the 30s and 40s, there was more chances, I think, for females to have babies, but I think our lifestyles just changed. And as you said, the food's interesting, what you said about the Mediterranean diet. I strongly believe that's the case, but I think the lifestyle of women just don't stay home anymore and just look after the house. They're out there working, and their minds are just...
Well, I think that they are putting off having childbearing until a later age, and that increases their infertility. So it's a real big compromise. What do you do there? For some reason, we need 2 incomes now to survive. And when you need 2 incomes, it does limit your chances to achieve a pregnancy. But,
Nick, how do you explain when the first child is an IVF child and then the second and third have just come naturally? How does that... You've heard that story. I've heard a few of those stories as well.
Absolutely. You kickstart the process. Yeah, you kickstart the process. The attitude changes. You're blessed. You've got one. You're a bit more relaxed. You often say to yourself, "I've got one. It doesn't really matter all that much." And before you know it, you've got a spontaneous pregnancy.
Focused on it. Yeah.
I have a lot of patients like that. The first one is always the big hurdle.
Mm. So one of them, yeah, and they start breeding like rabbits, some of them.
Some of them do that. Yeah. There are lots of, I think the most interesting thing is that I can remember seeing this in England. I had this couple and they were quite overweight, and he came in one day super excited because they realised after a year that he was never getting his penis into the vagina. He was just having sex with their thighs. And all of a sudden he found the hole and got into it. And of course, everybody was happy. So sometimes non-consummation can lead to it. And that's always an issue. Some men can't ejaculate and they have to do IVF. Some women have significant vaginismus, and there's no way you can actually help her by doing IVF or having a pregnancy in the normal way, having intercourse, and they often need to move on to surrogates. Fascinating.
Fascinating.
There's great rewards. It's one of those areas of medicine where there are great rewards. Not in financial terms, but just in joy.
Yeah, it's been around for a very long time. I know we've got women our age group that have gone through with you, and now my son's friends' wives have come through the IVF. You've been around for a very long time, Nick, so you'd be very proud of everything that you've achieved.
Well, you know, I need patience to achieve it and patience to listen and do it. Sometimes you just can't get it right, and you have to be honest with them. The only way to move on is about using donor eggs. And donor eggs are hard to come by in Australia because you can't pay. But it does give a good pregnancy rate if you can get a young donor. But some patients, their friends, best friends offer their eggs, and they're the same age, but they've had kids. So occasionally I relent and use those eggs, but I want to test the embryos to make sure they're normal.
Nick, if you weren't doing IVF, what would be your second choice to specialise in medicine? Did you have something else?
I was going to become a dermatologist, but I think I would have got sick of skin. I did go and watch some surgeons for a while, but you know, when I went to Queensland to do 10 weeks of an internship up there in obstetrics and gynecology, I thought that was wonderful, pulling a baby out of a vagina. I thought that was so exciting, and that's when I started doing obstetrics. I don't miss it now, though, let me tell you, but it was exciting at the time.
I remember when you started with Peter Kondos. Do you remember Mr. Peter Kondos?
Peter Kondos, yep.
He's retired now?
He has.
Yeah.
Oh, that's going back a long time.
That's when I first met you,
I had a big following of little old Greek ladies who used to come in with prolapses to have their prolapses fixed up. And they would take an unbelievable amount of time to get undressed. I said to one Greek lady, next time you come, I want you to wear a fur coat and nothing underneath. and she did. And she did. It was a very quick in and out. Great story.
You're a
lovely Greek woman. She's dead now.
So their fur coat.
So I do a little bit of gynecology, but mainly it's couples wanting to have a baby. And then the downside of that is the stress and the trauma it causes, not only within the nuclear family, but the extended family, and lots of marriages break up because they can't achieve a pregnancy. And whilst you try and get them to have counselling, it can be very, very stressful. And that can happen. Is that you, Connie?
Yeah, I just came on. I was late. Doesn't matter. It's going to be recorded and I'll listen to every word.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. It's happened, the Greeks say.
That's right. So I think that
you're looking good, Nick. You're looking good.
The measure, the message that you should take to your families if they're youngish is if they haven't found Mr. Right, freeze their eggs for when they meet Mr. Right.
Yep.
If they want a healthy baby, that would be the message. And it's the message I give all my young patients if they have endometriosis, to think about funding. But, you know, some girls can't afford the $5 or $6 grand it costs to fund, so they may need to seek out help from their parents. But that's the Greek way, isn't it? The Greek way. But I think it's a fascinating area, and the clinics are huge now. And they sometimes lose a little bit of the caring when they become big for the patient. And sometimes we overstep the mark. We thought that we had a magnificent test where we could test the embryos without taking cells out of them, a non-invasive form of testing the embryos. And that was, I think, a bit fraudulent by the people who developed the test. And we threw out a lot of embryos that could have been normal. So now we're having to make up for that with these couples. So there's a court case against us, a class action from patients who have been disappointed by this. So it's not without its problems. But you go on and you help. So if you have friends who are keen to give eggs, or friends who are keen to be a surrogate, they're the things we need in Australia at the moment, because they're hard to come by.
Is there a large amount of women who actually donate their eggs that are aware of this?
That's a very good question. Before the global financial crisis, we had lots of women who were happy to donate eggs. I think that frightened the daylights out of everybody, and nobody was prepared then to lose wages or to have a complication or to be off work when times were tight. So now I'm seeing it more through friends and relatives. There is a very nice man called Sam Everingham who has offices in Sydney, and he runs a company called Growing Families. And he's very helpful in helping me get patients out of Australia overseas for donor eggs and also overseas for surrogates. So he has this non-for-profit organisation that does a lot of work in that area. So we're often communicating and he's helping my patients. Sometimes a woman will walk in and say, I want to give something back to the community. I want to donate some eggs. So I match her up with somebody that I think she'll like and we go ahead. Okay. There are women who have completed their families and have got embryos that they don't want to discard. They don't want to use them for research. So they offer them to Monash IVF to donate out to women who need donor embryos. But they have to accept the fact that they'll have no access to those donor embryos because they'll belong to the commissioning couple who get them. Mm-hmm. There's so many ins and outs. And you know, sometimes it's a little bit, there's discrimination in this because
why am I 40?
The government decided that they would have police checks and child protection order checks to make sure that criminals weren't accessing IVF. Well, we got rid of that in 2019. But they still discriminate against poor women who've got, say, cancer of the uterus and they haven't got a womb. So they can make embryos, but they've got nowhere to put them. Well, that's illegal. And the government won't pay for those embryos being created like that. So there are all these sort of little subtleties in the legislation that makes it a bit difficult.
I think it's very interesting what you said about the government should give the opportunity for women to store their eggs. I think that's a great idea to do that.
And it's a pretty simple procedure. You take injections for 10 days, have a scan, come in, we put you to sleep, a light anaesthetic, bit of bleeding and lower abdominal pain, and you're right to go back to work 2 days later. And, you know, you can do as many of those as you like. But that is a huge option now for women if they have other things on their mind. They haven't met Mr. Right. They're not paying enough money for the Broxenia. You know, we could go on making our own list, but there's a way of saving these eggs.
Well, what government body would you go to, though, Nick, to try and get that happening?
Well, you can do it now without going to any government body. You just go to a Monash clinic and you say you want to harvest your eggs and freeze them.
Yeah, but if the girl can't afford it, the government will do what you said about getting them in the future if they're 40.
The government won't pay. The government won't pay. You have to fund it yourself. So, and you know, either your father, and of course, if you haven't got a lot of eggs, then you might have to do 3 or 4 collections to get what I see as the minimum amount of 20 eggs. Okay. So that could cost 20 grand. Yeah. And some of the options, though, that are available, and I'll just briefly go through the 5 options that I give all couples that come to see me before they embark upon IVF. I say, look, you don't have to do this. You can accept life as a childless couple. No school fees. No hassling over the inheritance. Sleep in on a Sunday. Go to the movies whenever you like. Have sex in any room of the house and scream as much as you like. Thank you very much. So these are all the options. Don't have any kids. Childless family. You could adopt, but that takes about 5 years. You could try with your own eggs, and obviously that's what most people do, or donor embryos or donor eggs. They're the 5 options.
So why is it so expensive?
Well, the clinics have huge staff numbers and they're all PhD embryologists, so it's expensive to have the staff. That's the problem, you know. I wish you could, there are very cheap clinics, but, you know, you get what you pay for. So the cheap clinics don't add any extra drugs. They don't do any testing. So it's very, very basic treatment. And it's good for young women, but not for the older women that need more help. So it's just one of those, I think the message is don't leave your childbearing too long. And if you haven't found Mr. Right, freeze your eggs.
Nick, there's a question in the chat from Evelyn Silvaris. The question is, what is the right of the progeny of the donor ova or sperm or embryo to access their biological history?
So that's a good question. So let me go back one step. I had this Greek couple that found a donor in Western Australia. So we flew the Western Australian girl out here. We got the eggs. She got pregnant with twins. Fantastic. But before we knew she had twins, the husband of the egg recipient didn't fulfill his promise to drive her to the airport with her 3 kids so she could catch the flight back to Western Australia, and left her high and dry. So what did I do? I sent an Uber to take her to the airport. So that settled that problem. But she was so angry, this lady, she refused them access to the embryos that she has frozen, that are frozen. So the donor has that right. The donor also has the right that when the child, because she knows if she's been successful, she can write, and this is in Victoria, she can write to the government seeking permission to talk to the offspring. So the government then writes to the offspring. They have to be 18. And then the offspring has a right to say yes or no. And vice versa. The offspring can write to the biological mother or father. But it's not a lay down misère that they get to see each other. But there is that policy in place.
Thank you.
But the donor owns the embryos basically and has control over them. So you want to keep in good with the donor. Don't have any fuss ideas, you know what I mean? Helen, you look as though you want to ask a question.
So Nick Dallas has just commented. Nick, can you say something about adoptions and the challenges around them?
Well, there are very few babies for adoption. That changed back in the 60s when 2 things happened. 1, the pill, and 2, abortion on demand. And virtually all the babies that they used to put up for adoption disappeared. So it's about a 5-year wait. And you have to go through lots of hurdles to get there. And they want you not to be doing IVF in parallel with applying to become a adopted parent. I think the joy it brings, even if it's not your eggs and sperm, is just amazing. I haven't gone into the intricacies of other things I do, but just to give you a brief sense of adventure for some of my patients, I look at their tissue compatibility to see if they share certain genes. And if they share certain genes, it makes it very hard for the embryo to implant. And there's 2 centres in Australia that do this therapy, mine here in Melbourne and a Dr Matthias in New South Wales. And we've helped lots of women, and there's a special Facebook group called the DQ Alpha Group, and they exchange stories, and the treatments that they receive is injecting the husband's blood, the white cells, into their skin. And this promotes the immune system in the mother, the host, to make specialized cells to look after the embryo when it gets put back into the uterus.
Gosh, very complicated.
That is a complicated, yeah, because that lymphocyte immunotherapy has to be done fresh. So I had 4 consultations with 4 couples in Sydney who all have tissue compatibility, who all need this because they have had no success in having an ongoing pregnancy. And as soon as the lockdown is over, they'll be flying down to Melbourne. There you go. That's something new.
Thank you very much, Nick. This has been a great presentation. We all appreciate all of the history of your obstetrician and your findings of the IVF and all the information that you've given us tonight. I'm sure we all have a lot more questions to ask. So I'm just going to close off now. You can chat after I've finished the spiel, if you want to have a mingle with each other. But yeah, thank you very much again. Very informative. And just to remind you that the next Kazzie Connect is on the 8th of September at 7 o'clock. And the host will be Nick Spartels with Justin Masteris. And it'll be a speaker in relation to real estate and the property market. So I'll hand it over to you, all of you Zoomers, to have a chat to each other. But thank you very much on behalf of the Kazzie community.
Thanks, a pleasure.
Thanks, Nick.
Well done.
Pleasure.
Very proud to have you on, Kazzie. Proud Kazzie.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Do you want me to stay on and answer questions, or they're just going to chat amongst themselves?
Yeah, if you guys want to chat amongst yourselves, if you've got any other questions, go ahead and ask Nick while he's there.
Can I just ask a question? Nick, what about thalassemia? Is that a problem for these girls?
If their partner has the same trait, yes. Because if they have the same trait, then the baby will get thalassemia major. And we all know that's pretty nasty. So we can test the embryos for that. Or you don't fall in love unless you screening first. It's a bit like that movie Gattaca, where you can't marry anybody. You have to be screened.
Yeah.
To make sure that there aren't any hidden little mysteries that are going to happen. And when I think about it, there are always couples within the Kastellorizian group or friends who struggle to achieve a pregnancy. And you often didn't know the reason for that. Sometimes it might have been blocked tubes, or it might have been a poor sperm count. It might have been tissue compatibility. And then there were the super fertile ones, you know, just the smell of the underpants and you'd be pregnant.
Anyway, unbelievable.
That's what they used to say to me. Doctor, I'd just smell his underpants and I'd get pregnant. I've heard everything. Nothing shocks me.
Oh, thank you.
There's a fascinating area of medicine, and the changes in the 40 years have been unbelievable, and they've all been remarkably helpful in terms of achieving better quality. And this testing that we're doing now is increasing the pregnancy rates dramatically, and hopefully that'll continue, and there'll be newer things in the future to help.
Nick, it's Nick again. With America, are we more advanced than they are? Do you think we're more advanced here in Australia than the Americans?
So here's the kicker. The first pregnancy was in the UK, and they just did it with a single egg. So it took them about 8 months. We followed Toot Sweet because we were doing multiple eggs, and the Americans were about 5 years behind us. We were teaching them what to do in clinics in Melbourne in the early 80s.
There you go.
So look, they've caught up now, and a lot of the clinics around the world have good programs, don't get me wrong, but there was a lag time.
Oh, well done.
And Monash decided to expand all over the world.
Nick?
Yes,
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, Peter.
Where are you, Peter?
muted himself.
Sorry,
Peter. And you can't see, but
Peter, are you there?
the eldest you had was 53.
So,
Right?
Terrible sound.
I'm not hearing you. 53 was the oldest you ever had.
Well, that's the oldest I've had, but there have been older women who have conceived overseas, but there are age limits here in Australia.
Right. One of them was my father's mother, who delivered her 18th child when she was 54.
Yeah. They're very rare.
Father, not the Kazzie side of the family.
And that was with her own eggs, I take it. But that's a pretty rare. That's a pretty rare event.
And he lived to 83, that baby, and died about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I've heard you all night long, by the way. I noticed that you said the longest you can keep the sperm, the eggs, I beg your pardon, 24 years. Is that correct?
No. The government in Victoria, the government wants you to decide what you're going to do with your eggs every 5 years. You can't keep them indefinitely. But there is a case, I don't think it was in Victoria, but there is a case reported where an embryo had been frozen for 24 years, was thawed and produced a pregnancy.
Wow.
Right. Okay. I'll get off this because the reception's terrible anyway, and you're probably not hearing me either. But I've enjoyed it very much, Nick, and it's good to see you looking so good, my friend. You do. Very good.
It's all the cosmetic surgery, George.
Anyway, look forward to seeing you again one day.
Okay. All right.
Hi, George.
thanks, Nick.
That was George McGuinness.
So maybe Nick Spartels, you can speak to your mate in the government, the new health minister, and maybe convince him that maybe the Victorian government could start funding egg collections for young girls at 24.
Maybe we should. Maybe after he quiets down a bit after this pandemic, we might have to make a phone call.
No, open the Kazzie sperm bank. What do you think?
I'm not going to say anything. Anyway, I'm going to go. Thank you very much, Nick. Very fantastic, mate. Well done. Absolute credit to where you've come in life, and great Kastellorizian, and you've done a lot for obviously for a lot of the people around Australia. I hope you've produced more Carlton supporters and Collingwood ones, though. Anyway, God bless you, mate, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Keep up wonderful work, Nick Lolatgis.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Thanks, Nick.
Bye.
Nick, goodbye, mate.